Carl Jung believed that dreams allowed a connection between the conscious and unconscious mind. Jung theorized that dreams serve as a means to balance the personality, a lamb in life, a lion in dreams. But what if that unconscious mind isn't your own, and those intense feelings are exactly what it wants? This week, Sam finds out the worst isn't over. I'm your narrator, Chad, and this is episode 8, chapter 12 of No Evil. Let's escape. The garbled noise, the screeching whisper was slamming inside of his brain again. Sam shot up, this time right out of bed, and knocked into something metallic that fell and reverberated against the floor. His hands went instinctively to his ears, but the sound could not be blocked out. It would not be blocked out. He could feel it. Fleeting thoughts. Intention. He slipped and fell to his knees, cracking his head against the side of the bed as he did. He felt the hair on the back of his neck stand up, followed by the hair on his arms, and then head. The paper hospital smock they had around him began to float up as well. He felt his knees rising off the ground.
Help me.
Sam's voice seemed far away to him. He could barely hear himself. He was rising faster now, his legs almost over his head. He reached for the bed, hoping to pull himself down. He managed to scrape the top of the bed with the palm of his hand, and his fingertips slipped over some sort of rope. No, not rope, a cord. He reached again, pulling a muscle in his arm, but he got it. He pressed the button on the remote repeatedly.
Help me.
Latchford and Nielsen couldn't have been far away because Sam heard them almost immediately pounding at the door. They pounded steadily and loudly, and Sam couldn't understand why they wouldn't help.
Help me.
What the hell's gotten into this guy now? Nielsen said. Latchford got to the door first, struggled to turn the knob, and found she couldn't force the door open. She pounded with one balled-up fist. They could see light, blinding light, coming from under the door. Nielsen joined Latchford in trying to force the door open, and, with much effort, it finally swung inward, throwing them both off balance as they entered the room. What in the fuck? Nielsen said, his raspy voice abnormally high.
How is this possible?
Sam Munson floated above the bed, thumb clicking the remote, but otherwise motionless. His eyes were cast down as if staring at the floor, while his feet were crossed and arms spread wide at either side. Nielsen and Latchford tried to shield their eyes as the overpowering light bled from Sam's. Suddenly his head raised, startling the veteran officers, and they both instinctively grasped their sidearms.
Mr. Munson, can you hear me?
The voice echoed through them, nearly dropping Latchford to her knees. Nielsen stumbled backward into the open door, and it slammed against the wall. The voice again, painful clarity, garbled, sharp. What's he talking about? Do you know what he means? What do you mean, Munson? Nielsen said, but there was no answer. The light in Sam's eyes increased, and his head focused on Nielsen. The light began not just to blind, but to burn. What the fuck is happening? Latchford, get out of here! Nielsen's flesh began to peel back from his bones, first on his face, then downward in a horrifically straight line, opening him wide like a grotesque saloon door. The peeled flesh began to burn, crackling and sizzling and filling the room with black, choking smoke. Latchford tried to run, but she found she could no longer see anything but white. She felt for the door, but only found a bare hospital wall. Her hair ignited and charred her skull, moving downward sickly straight until there was nothing left of Latchford but soot. Nielsen's open corpse sat smoldering against the door. Tate woke up, struggling to breathe. He hacked, coughed, and rolled around on his back, trying to force air into his lungs. He rolled to one side and saw smoke wafting from the charred remains of Sierra's clothing. Jeff was there too. At first Tate thought Jeff was mumbling, but his lips weren't moving. Their faces were black with crisp fat and skin. Large red boils on them were popped and pus trails ran down their cheeks and neck. The flies were lifeless again.
Jeff? Sierra?
Tate said. He realized it was he who had been mumbling, and he couldn't prevent a great sob from escaping him. Tears tore a trail through the black soot on his face, and Tate wailed away. Sierra and Jeff gained a degree of consciousness, and their groans of pain seemed to fuel Tate's cries as he let out another wail when he heard them. Tate's eyes itched, and his ears rang. He was thinking in slow motion with a nagging feeling in the back of his mind. So far back he could feel it on the nape of his neck. There was an echoing voice, like hearing a song while asleep. Jeff pushed himself to his feet, glanced at Sierra, and turned to Tate.
The fuck did you just do, Tate?
Tate looked up and shook his head.
Tell me,
Jeff said, taking in a huge gulp of air.
Tell me what the fuck just happened.
Tate opened his mouth, began to try to form a sentence, but stopped. He reached in his pocket and took out a pen and scrawled a few words on his palm. He held it out for Jeff.
Yeah, sure you don't, you lying piece of shit. You rigged this up.
Sierra stood up behind Jeff. Her eyes wandered around the office, not really looking at anything until they fell on Tate on the floor. She took a step forward and cocked her hand back before swinging hard at Tate's face. Without taking his eyes off of Jeff, Tate's hand caught Sierra's wrist mid-slap. The slow molasses thoughts cleared and his brain came back to normal speed. He could remember only a penetrating voice. It was someone speaking, that much he knew, but what the voice was saying wasn't clear.
You let her the fuck go,
Jeff said, pulling his fist back. Jeff was a big man, well over 6 feet, maybe weighed about 220. Tate by comparison was slight. He was maybe 5'9" on a good day, weighed about 170 the last time he checked. All the same, he caught Jeff's punch without any meaningful effort. Tate's eyes lit up bright white, and he pulled Sierra and Jeff close. The voice echoed through him, flowed through him like his own blood.
What is this?
The voice was inside them all. It canceled out their own thoughts so that the voice was the only sound that they could comprehend. Tate felt the power flowing through him, and a small smile crooked the corner of his mouth. The light faded from Tate's eyes.
Was that me?
The voice vibrated inside of them again. They each sat quietly, not making the slightest noise. Their charred faces worriedly scanned the room. Tate suddenly sprang to his feet and ran back to his cubicle. He dropped to his knees without slowing and slid the final 2 feet to the drawers of his desk. He pulled out a bottom drawer, dug around for a second, then pulled it all the way out of his desk. He turned it over and spilled its contents across the floor. Tate threw paper haphazardly around until he found it. He brushed a stack of business cards off of a small silver crucifix and picked it up. He looked at it for a minute before putting it on. Tate turned to see Jeff and Sierra standing stone-faced to the right of him.
What does it mean?
Jeff said, looking small.
Lord?
The word flashed in one tone and then another. It was clear and then faded. Then it seemingly flipped from one ear to the other.
Was that?
Sierra started to speak, then turned to Jeff. He didn't take his eyes off Tate. Tate was smiling, beaming from ear to ear. He looked skyward, then grabbed his crucifix around his neck and kissed it.
Lord, is it you?
Jesus. What the hell does... How?
Who's talking?
Jeff finally turned to look at Sierra. She was crying and wiping away tears with the back of her hand, and he wrapped his hands around her. Tate continued to smile wide as he took slow steps toward them. They both stepped back. The smile disappeared from him. He tried to speak.
Yes. It's in.
The words flopped out of his mouth in slobbering grunts. Tate concentrated hard, trying to slowly mouth the words to them. Saliva spilled out of the side of his mouth and he wiped it away. It was covered in a thick auburn ooze.
Oh my Jesus. His fucking tongue is gone,
Jeff said.
Yes.
The word caught him like a strong wind. He could feel resistance from the wave. Tate watched Jeff and Sierra exchange another nervous glance.
Is that coming from you?
Sierra asked Tate.
What?
Again the word pulsed from him. They cowered further across the hall, until they were leaning against another cubicle. Their eyes were wide, and they looked like they might run at any moment. He knew then that they could hear what he was thinking. Tate continued to move slowly forward, his hands outstretched.
Don't fear me. Understand?
Fuck. We understand. Tate inhaled deeply. Outside, the wind and snow had picked up, and each of them took turns glancing out at the flakes streaming past the street lamps. His mind swirled like the snow.
I have to leave. Have to get out of here.
Sierra said.
We have to call the cops.
She began to head away from Jeff and Tate. Jeff sank, sliding down the wall of the cubicle and sitting with his elbows resting on his knees. Tate stepped past his legs and rushed to grab her. He snatched her wrist, but she pushed him off.
Let go, you creep.
Stay.
Fuck you. Let go of me.
You will stay.
His anger rose, and the building seemed to settle hard at the same time. The windows in the old building rattled, and a picture frame fell off the wall and smashed. She cowered and shook, then fell to the floor and limply out of Tate's grip. He tried to wipe the tears from her eyes, but she batted away his hand.
Okay.
Sierra said. Tate didn't know why it was happening, but he had no doubt about how. It was God. There was no other possibility in his mind. While he'd let religion slip from his life, it would always be part of him.
What are you gonna do to us?
Jeff said, his head sinking between his knees. Tate thought hard about the question. When he thought he'd come to a suitable answer, he tried to force the thought from him like before. He focused hard on his answer, a few sentences at a time, but he couldn't convey them properly. They spun out of him in scraping squawks like a microphone too close to an amp. Jeff and Sierra covered their ears, and their faces scrunched in discomfort. Before, the words seemed to fire from his mind like a gun, but now he couldn't seem to figure it out. Tate cleared his mind and focused instead on one word.
Nothing.
His response in its simplest form was all he could manage. It was like aiming a basketball through a hoop. He had to find the right arc to make it happen. The thought had to be simple. There couldn't be any distractions. Tate no longer had a tongue, but he could speak.
I won't harm you.
That's all for episode 8, chapter 12 of No Evil. Let us know what you think in the comments. If you like what you hear, please follow, like, subscribe, click the bell, do all the social media things. If you're new to the channel and want to know what you can do to support, you could always form a folk metal band called Burlap Death and tour Europe, generating a loyal following of lapdogs. From there, you begin subconsciously implanting your listeners with a love for AV Escapes through a series of songs that describe relaxing nature scenes and stories. Your fans will suddenly find themselves drawn to the channel, and only via your deathbed confession will they understand the full truth that Burlap Death was always inspired by AV Escapes. Please become an escapist by subscribing and clicking the bell. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you at the next escape.